let me start. I want to, first of all, before we go any further, I'm Rick Towle. I'm the Deputy Director of UNHCR, sitting in some high floor in New York, emerging from the ravages of COVID, which really took its toll on this city and is now coursing around the rest of the United States with some brutality. So these are strange times, but it's fantastic opportunity using these platforms to reconnect with old friends and contacts, and I'm delighted that COVID has given me the opportunity to reconnect with Patrice, sitting there in Kuala Lumpur, head of Vision C and Deja VU project, and also with our guest today, Roland Neveu, who's I think sitting in Brittany after enjoying the French countryside. So just let me say at the beginning, I had the fortune of being involved with the Vision C Deja VU project at least 3 years ago when I was still in Malaysia with UNHCR, and we went co-hosted a fantastic photographic exhibition which in Kuala Lumpur, which showed many graphic and powerful images from across the decades, starting, Roland, with your very important and powerful work from the Khmer Rouge Pol Pot period of the 1970s, going right through to that terribly graphic image of Aylan Kurdi, the young boy whose body was found on the beach in Greece after having escaped from Syria. So the two images for me captured 40 years of frontline photo war journalism at their best. So to be associated again, to see you, Roland, have the pleasure to see you is really a real pleasure. But this is one of those events that's not about me being interviewed, but about me being able to talk to you about your life's work, and it really gives me a great pleasure to do that. Roland, I think your work goes back many decades, as I say, as a young photographer at the front lines of Pol Pot coming and the Khmer Rouge coming into the streets of Phnom Penh, the sort of the peasant army meeting some shell-shocked city people and really wondering what the future bade for them. And you were there along with a few select others to capture those incredibly powerful moments. And of course, we all know what happened later on as the cities were purged of people, sent to the countrysides, and hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives and their futures. So the power of those haunting images that we all saw, and certainly motivated me when I started my work with refugees all those years ago, working incidentally in Southeast Asia with the Indo-Chinese boat people, and the images of people on boats seeking protection was very powerful and probably motivated me. I would say that I was motivated to do the work that I do over the last 30 years in part by virtue of these very powerful images that you, Roland, and others in your club, your elite club, have been able to contribute to you. So thank you for that, and thank you for the motivating power of photojournalism done well, done professionally, and at the right time. So I would perhaps like to explore those themes. Maybe, Roland, you can perhaps, just tell us a little bit about what drew you as a young man both to photography and to the charms and trials and tribulations of Southeast Asia in the 70s. It was a turbulent place compared to how it is now. What drew you, Roland, to Southeast Asia and photojournalism that marked out your life and career?
I guess we have to make a little short story, otherwise we'll be here for days. Basically, studying in university in Britain, in fact, sociology in a way, I was drawn to, looking at the world, basically. And by engaging in photography, very early at that stage, in fact, I combined, very quickly the two, photography and looking at the world with a very, deeper interest, And eventually, I had a few trips around Europe, and eventually decided to go a lot further to Asia. And I was, in 73, in fact. And 73 was a kind of a turning point in the war in Indochina, with Vietnam starting to try to work on a peace track, and Cambodia still into the really deep civil war. with no end in sight. So this is really where I kind of saw, I mean, really, for first, I mean, the really dangerous world and very desperate situation that was Cambodia. And this is how it started. And in fact, it's happened that I did several trips and came back in 75. And eventually things start to change radically with the arrival of the Khmer Rouge. And by that time, I knew that I was definitely going to be an eyewitness on the world stage. So it was not, I mean, refugees was already there. In fact, I mean, it was not that reported in such an extent that it is now. But Cambodia was maybe one of the first, I mean, modern case of huge amount of internally displaced people, because the fighting had drowned 2 million people to Phnom Penh by 17th of April 1975. And this is a country with barely at the time 7 million people. So Phnom Penh, a small city of 100 and something thousand people before the war, had inflated to 2 million people who had fled war, basically, really. And there was people everywhere. I mean, in every corner of the city, and it started really mushrooming around, you know, the swamp. I mean, around Phnom Penh, and that was really. I spent a lot of time. I mean, going around those places at the time, but I can say it was not really what we call a sexy story. You know, I mean, we were really being driven at the time to just do the war, try to get the bang bang on the front line and say, hey, I mean, refugees were not really part of the mainstream media. I mean, it took time, in fact. And I mean, if you let me talk more, I will talk nonstop. Now,
I can ask you, Roland, about that.
I mean, I think the Cambodian refugee was a big, very, very big thing. I mean, that's happened in 1979. It's a few years back, you know, when Pol Pot was moved out of the scene and the Vietnamese, I mean, took over the place. It did, in fact, to my, I mean, remembering, I mean, when I was young, of course, World War II was a big event, of course, people moving around in Europe and everywhere. But, you know, in those modern times, with more photography available and more TV already, I mean, coming out with newscasts were being, I mean, seen 2 or 3 days after it's happened at the time. And 79 was that huge, I mean, story in the world. I mean, with a Cambodian fleeing over the border and the Vietnamese fleeing by boat around, I mean, everywhere in Southeast Asia. And I mean, that was really in the heart of it. I mean, for so long, for all that time, you know. So it's really that my career as in photography really was along that upheaval, you know, and refugees, and you know, it's interesting because little by little you know, became comfortable to go along with these people, you know, and to make easy, because you really we were bringing a little piece of hope. I remember in Cambodia, I mean, just to mention one, that one picture that we were talking about the other day, you know, with the family and the children in the forest, you know, that was taken little mid-79. And I've heard from the, you know, the children she has in her arm at the time, and the kid that which are by her, that eventually they tell me like 45 years after that, when they saw a white man with a camera where they were like drenched and walking in the forest, it does brought to them light. It really makes them believe that our ordeal is kind of going to an end, because something new is coming up in the face, you know. So eventually, I mean, you know, it's kind of a well compensated effort to try to go and cover the piece, you know.
Well, look, Roland, I mean, that's one area, because I think my work with refugees and your work as a photojournalist bearing witness, arrives at the same point by different methods. You are there on the front line with photography bearing witness and giving voice to invisible people, and refugees are often invisible people. And that's our work as well with UNHCR, is trying to provide protection by being there, providing oxygen to people's lives, and also being able to show what is going on to places far away. The power of your work, and I'm thinking for those graphic images of Nick Ort's work of the young girl who had been napalmed and was running away from the airstrike. That fed into a narrative in the United States, didn't it, at the time, that was very compelling as an anti-war narrative, which may actually in its own way have stemmed the tide towards war or pushed it back in the other direction. We have your namesake Roland Joffe's work, The Killing Fields, looking at,
yes,
in a dramatic, fictional, so quasi-fictional way, the story of things that you've seen firsthand. I'd like perhaps your reflections a bit on the power of your message, but also the responsibility that goes with that. Perhaps it's just you bearing witness to these big events and trying to communicate those to people far away. How does that feel, Roland, as a photographer? That's more than capturing the image; it's what you do with it and how you transport it to places where it can make a difference.
There shouldn't be any reason for someone to really go deep in some jungle or mud and everything just for his own contrition or pleasure or whatever to get picture of people in dear state. You have to establish something, and that something is you are the one who have been kind of interested in going there on the field, but you have to bring it. I mean, you have to send the message. You really have to bring back the message. I mean, and bringing back the message was the leitmotiv. I mean, behind. I mean, going around those places. Frankly, I won't see a reason for anyone to go and see such misery and all those things. Okay, you'll go. You have to have a mission. I mean, you go to help. You go to install. I mean, there's so much to do when you see people like this. I mean, you have to establish liaison with the government and all those problems when you are in borderland. And you have to go and do something. You cannot just go over there without anything meaningful. And I felt probably the same than you, in a sense. You go there, you have a mission, you got to do something which is going to bring relief. And for the lensman, is to bring picture we are going to impact, the public back home, for also a couple of reasons. Because if you don't do anything meaningful, you're not going to earn a living, basically. I mean, as a photojournalist, I mean, usually when you go on those front line early on, you are a freelancer. Nobody will sign you out to go out there and risk a lot. So you have to really go on your own, motivation. So then it means that you have to have a work which is, enough. Is going to impact enough, so that's going to be carried across several outlets of media, and then of course, it gives you the means to continue, and so it's kind of a double-edged sword. You cannot be a tourist out there. You have to you have to know what's the end, what's come after your work, because the work is not finished right there.
Now, I'd like, perhaps in a moment, we can talk a little bit about how things are different in terms of photojournalism in the 2020 digital age, where we've got different fast-moving platforms. But when you were setting out as a freelance photographer, you were obviously trying to sell the products in a way, those images, to mainstream media using the old mainstream ways of doing that, taking your image, probably going to some dark room somewhere with the red light to develop your pictures and put them into a canister and then get them off and get them through some kind of a filtering process, which we talked about the other day. You've got editors and sensors and all sorts of filters, which I guess has now disappeared in terms of the modern day of working. But can you share a little bit about how it was in those days? Not only were you in the front line, but you also had to get out of the front line to a safe place to then develop your pictures and then get them off. So how was that now? I mean, in those days, it must have been pretty challenging.
It's definitely different. I mean, probably less of a technical challenge in a sense, because, well, you have the film, and if you couldn't bring your film back to some lab and then onto some editing room, your work was counting for zero in a way, which is that was the worst kind of outcome. Now, it would take always thinking forward. Whenever you have something in hand and you see a situation, the most important then for you is, how can I get that out there? And sometimes you have hours or days to work in a way, and organize shipping. There was at the time, sometimes we developed on a location where you could find a lab, or you would ship the film without knowing at all what was on it to Paris or to New York, and then start the process of okay, you develop the film and they develop the film. They try to do the good work. If you haven't done perfect images, they won't see anything, and they just probably throw it, maybe not in the garbage, but they definitely put it on the side. So you got to have a work which is absolutely meaningful and self-explicative in a sense. And then it goes through the editors. You have the editors at your agency, you have the editors at the different bureau, and it goes to the editor at the magazine, at the newspaper, or whatever. It really goes through a number of barriers that I would think, really filter, you call it, where they would decide the worthiness of your work, and as well the worthiness of the story. And in fact, when you see your image into a publication, at the time, he had gone, through many stages and traveled a lot of mileage, which is, a far cry from today. But at the time, you had access to a big audience. Whenever you had some, important work, the end was big audience. That would be the big magazine, newspapers and everything. So you couldn't just do you could do something for yourself. I've met people around, at the time, who maybe were not as successful, into their work, but so they would cover the story and organize back home or in some place an exhibition or something, like, to explain the story, which have its value as well, But photo reporters, when you do that, you want to reach as many people as you can dream of anyway, because this is where your work is being valued, and so I was always on that side of operation. In a way, now looking back at it with many more years, I think that anyone would go to a place and do a fine work, and coming back and do an exhibition and can have a very significant impact with his work. Now it's different because you can multiply that impact with social media and all that thing. It's so different. It's so different. The thinking of your work is so different as well.
What I find very interesting is the subjectivity of the photographer, because you're there witnessing, but nobody's neutral in these things. Your capturing of images is also an interpretive tool. The camera is an interpretation as you see it, and then in the filter it goes to some editor in New York or Paris for the magazine. And of course, there is no neutrality either. There's selling copy, but also interpretations, whether the newspaper is its politics, left or right of center of the mainstream of politics. So there's opportunities for storytelling, but there's a high risk of subjectivity. How do you deal with that? This whole question of your interpretation and your presentation of facts. We've heard a lot in the last few years about fake news and the malleability of facts, which we didn't discuss 30, 40 years ago. But how do you, as the frontline photographer, deal with that question of subjectivity or neutrality?
Yeah, well, you know, I was feeling when I work, I've been through a educating process and all, and you do have some responsibility toward your compatriots and all the people, in a sense. So we, in a way, I would say, back in those times, we really consider that we are holding a piece of truth. The image, of course, image have been manipulated and things, but you can feel, if you can transmit, some image, you can sense that it is not manipulated, it is not being twisted in a sense. And mostly when you are on the front line of war and refugee and things, I was working at making something which is very straightforward. We're not trying as much in the past. In my early years to try to get those amazing angles and everything. There was no such thing. And frankly, when I was in my 20s, there was never that idea of augmenting reality in a sense. The defining work was just get it straight, just get it as it is, with as much empathy and as much thing that you can convey within the image. And I don't know, I do not remember to see too many, people around me were manipulative into the way they were working and all. Maybe there was not that much competition as well. So you are not so many people, to try to transcribe, a situation. So you feel that responsibility and that straightforwardness, into bringing this thing to the rest of the world. Now, we noticed then that when it gets to the editor of the magazine or the thing like this, that's where they would kind of reorganize a little what was on the table, and eventually by cropping or by doing those things. We're totally aware of that, but this is something we couldn't control at the time, except one I've seen, complaint from some of the photographer after a picture being used partially or being cropped, But I think it's different. Frankly, today there is so much more competition. I think a lot of people out in the field have agenda a lot more than I think in the past. I think so. This is my firm, belief. That more people out there to advance. In a way or another, specific. Topics. Much more than in my older time.
I guess that's an opportunity, but also a risk. Anybody can take an image if you're in the right place at the right time. It's captured on video footage or stills in any place and moved with the speed of light to other places. And the advantage is that there's an immediacy about sharing images, but like everything else in this modern proliferation of the internet, there's so much stuff out there. Do you think the war correspondent image has become less powerful as a result of its being sort of too much available? It's become perhaps so widespread and commercialized or instrumentalized that it's lost some of its power, or do you still think there is a place for that powerful immediacy of the image in the tradition that you've been a sort of a proud camera bearer of, if I can discuss it like that?
I think it's still there. I mean, okay, there is less. I mean, in the past there was less. I mean, images and less things. Now we have a lot more occasion of having image, but you can see in, you know, even unknown stories. I mean, we can always see, I mean, very original, very amazing thing. And you still have people, I mean, getting to those places and bringing back even raw. I mean, if somebody is, we have seen it at some point, somebody like videographing some event in some place. It's a raw cut. I mean, it's not cut. This is a raw stuff. So you can see for yourself some news. I mean, a lot of news. How do you call a news channel? That's what they use. If there is some, I mean, important event somewhere, they would broadcast raw. I mean, or directly from Instagram, or directly from other like a video thing. So in that sense, you still have the same more impact, because you are like, I mean, showing live, I mean, what's happening. For us, it was never live, I mean, live in a sense, you know, in the past. It's the perception from the public side, that's probably have changed. First of all, because we have seen more and more. I mean, there is what do you call there is more and more things, I mean, to try to catch the attention of the public. There is not more story. I don't think there are more stories now than there would be 20, 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, so because you have more media outlet, you have more people out of the field. So I think there is a higher level of saturation, and it does, well, you know, the fatigue, you know, that we can see in the people, I mean, the public, and that fatigue is definitely more noticeable now than I would say 45 years ago when the Khmer refugee walked across the border. To me, there is much more fatigue, you know, from the public, and that fatigue come from really come from that, you know, feeding, you know, I mean, over the years and the time of more and more stories. I think we were like much more welcome with all stories, you know, in the past, and now, you know, you hear so often, well, another one of these, another one of these, another one of these. It's different. I mean, I see it, you know, and not every day, but very regularly.
Yeah, we see that. You know, last week we published our annual State of the World Refugee Statistics and Displaced People, and the number of people forcibly displaced in the last 10 years has jumped from 40 million to 80 million people. And the scale of that, I mean, behind every statistic, of course, is a human story of tragedy and courage and resilience. But 80 million people is, you know, 1 in 100 people on the planet today is in some form of displacement. And I think your challenge, I think you talked about compassion fatigue, which is what we face in our work as well. Is how do you keep people impassioned about the injustices of what's going on when we're so saturated by different forms of problems and news, and the overall scale of these things seems to be today far greater than it was in the past. Given the lens of still photography and the documentary filmmaking, how does one keep that sense of immediacy and passion going on to mobilize people? We saw here in the United States recently the power of a video clip to mobilize the Black Lives Matters movement, which was on the back of a video clip. And so it still is a power to ignite some social movements and consciousness, and your work probably still lies at the heart of that. But What do you think? I mean, with all your years of experience.
You still have it. I mean, the case, I mean, definitely. I mean, that's what's happened a few weeks ago. I've brought that much resonance into the public that the photograph of Nick Hurt, I mean, back at the end of the Vietnam War, you know, it's really, yeah, I think it's kind of normal. Something important would be seen as important, while something important are being missed as well. But nevertheless, it does happen, and it does happen on a very raw form. You know, it's just always right into the heat of the moment. You know, yes, I mean it's well. Let's see that the momentum stay as well. You know, when you have some stories, because you have to keep interest. I mean, for the public, I mean, public can really go very quickly onto some thing, and then you see 2 or 3 months later, interest is being lost. You know. Now, I want to go back to the number of refugee and internally displaced people, because I think we are not counting the same way that we did count, I mean, 30 or 40 years ago, or even more recently in so many countries. If we look at, I think we are much more into trying to record data now, in a sense. I mean, frankly, in most of the countries I've been in, you know, 70s, 80s, 90s, with conflict and all, we would see the same number of internally displaced or refugees and everything. What have changed to me really in the recent past is that capacity to log into information, that capacity for people to understand, I mean, how the world, or you can communicate, or you can move. And the thing is, 40 years ago, Afghan living, I mean, through Parachina or through, I mean, going to Peshawar, they had no clue that they could eventually, I mean, manage to go to, you know, Italy or France or Germany or whatever. Now, they all have a phone. I mean, they have a tablet, they have something. They understand that they can really work out a way to get to better grasp. It's a very, very deep change, you know, into the mind of the people who are being, I mean, victimized. Now they're much quicker to try to work out for themselves on that thing. So it really puts a lot of people on the move, because they can expect something. They know that they can expect something because they know that exists outside, I mean, in other places. This is a thing that in the past, people were just kind of, okay, you are being thrown out of your house or anything. You have no way to know what you should do or could do. You know, you have to wait for I mean, an organization to come and help you right there when you are being stuck. You know, now it's different, and that perception is going very fast. You know, I mean, when we look at, I mean, I've been reading stories of people escaping from Syria, you know, with a mobile phone, and track the trip and all. It's amazing. It's really amazing. And this is something new, and I mean, the word is very different, of course, and communication is such. I mean, is being used by everybody, not only the people at you know, in the comfort. You know, the one which are not in the comfort, they do the same use. You know, people living in Africa, I mean, you have some really amazing picture of people trying to catch some signal at night in, I think that's Ethiopia or something like this, on the track, on the way to cross the desert. And yeah, I mean, technology have changed, I mean, many things, and certainly for those people.
It's certainly a complicated world, but the cold reality still, as we find from our work, is that 85% of the displaced are still living and trapped in the developing world. They're not able to come to Europe or to North America. They're stuck. Whereas when we dealt with the Indo-Chinese and the Cambodians, there was a massive opportunity for Vietnamese, for example, to come to Canada and the United States, and that in effect created its own set of pull factors into Malaysia and Thailand and Indonesia, as you'll remember. So I'm often struck by, we talk about we're working in a new world where everything's different, but when it comes to displacement and human misery and man's capacity to bring cruelty to other man and their families, we seem to be stuck in the same poor behaviors without to be able to transcend that. And I just wonder, before we finish, Roland, I mean, plus ça change, some of the media might be different, but is the role of bearing witness, taking important documentary evidence? I liked what you said, holding a piece of truth as an incredible, perhaps leitmotif for the whole discussion, of holding a piece of truth in a day and age where truth is negotiable, less tangible in many ways. What do you think? I mean, what would we say at the end of this very interesting discussion between us, as a photographer talking to a humanitarian? Where did we go?
Yeah. Well, I think it's holding a piece of truth. I think it's for one feeling that if you had, enough self-respect and empathy, and when you are confronted with something, and if you can carry that over time, and of course, if it's that truth, it could have been stories. I mean, in the past, people transmit stories from generation to generation. So for our modern time, image is a key. The image, do carry an instant comprehension from the people who are looking at it. So having the chance of being there and recording some of those things, frankly, it's first, it's a certain self-congratulation in a sense, but at the same time, it does carry its good own weight. I mean, let's see, with my picture from the fall of Phnom Penh, we went at so many people over there, and I can feel that there is more interest on those images now than 50 years ago. I mean, almost 45 years ago when I took it, there was interest. That was very interesting. But now people look at those images with such a different angle, and they really read the situation. So I have the sense that the fact that I was being there is more important now than I felt it was at the time. So eventually, those kind of thing about the march of the word, in a way, let's have more and more people get a piece of truth at any time, and that will carry on. And eventually, sadly, the word doesn't evolve so fast into the better direction, but we cannot control that too much. But eventually, it does make good for enough people. At any time, and more people eventually.
Well, Roland, thank you. I lost the volume. Was a bit difficult for me to hear at the end.
Can you hear me?
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I still hear you perfect. Yes.
Okay, the volume went a little bit, so something's happening between New York and Brittany. But look, this for me has been fascinating to have the tables turned. I'm usually being interviewed myself, and to have the pleasure of having a chat to a fellow professional with all of your experience and knowledge and wisdom. I think, and also what you've seen, what you have to say has just as much value and currency and importance today as it ever did. And that's our challenge, to still make sure that we use these platforms to keep the narrative honest, to hold that piece of truth, which you talked about. So thank you very much. And thank you very much to Patrice Vigency Deja Vu for this opportunity to meet each other across the seas and lands. for this in this series of discussions. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard. I mean, I really appreciate, talking with, someone who has been in the field, in the same fields, in fact, for so long. And of course, you are much more into the front line today. And it's really in that area, you guys at the, UNHCR, to find ways to evolve also in the way how to reach out, how to help, and things like this. Maybe we have to move as well into that direction, like to really have more communication to the people who are about to leave a country or to leave a place and go to another. I think this is the next step. People have been on the move forever. That's what we know. People have been moving from countries, from area forever. So I think this is going to keep growing. People will move more for so many more reasons, and the climate and everything. We have to move toward something where people understand what it means. The one who are moving, they have to understand more about the world, and the world they are going to move on. And we have a big thing to do in that part, of education. To me, education remains the most key point. And you are at the forefront of education now.
Okay, thank you very much, and all the best, Roland, and all the best to those who've dialed into this, I think, very interesting discussion. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of the day or evening.
Okay. Hello, New York.